Welcome to Politics Unplugged. I'm Ann Trujillo. Another big week in politics in Washington, D.C. and Colorado. And right now, a lot of attention is focused on the U.S.-Mexico border. Thousands of people from Central America are at the border. And for now, most of them are stopped. 5,000 men, women, and children are now camped out at a sports complex in the border city of Tijuana, hoping to be interviewed by U.S. officials as part of the asylum process. Now, inspectors are only processing about 100 asylum cases per day, at the crossing between Tijuana and San Diego, meaning the backlog could last for some time. And there are concerns about the living conditions while they wait. Families living in tents, not far from growing piles of trash and rows of portable toilets. And the conditions are just getting worse by the day. And call it a humanitarian crisis or an invasion, the caravan and the images have been dominating our news feeds. And joining us to talk about the situation and the implications is Dr. Carlos Hipólito Delgado, Associate Professor in Counseling at the University of Colorado, Denver. So first of all, thank you for being here. And those images are pretty staggering when we see, especially initially when we were seeing families separated at the border. No matter your political viewpoint, those images are hard to watch.
Well, thank you for having me here, Ann. Yes, it is. It's hard, I think, any human to see that and not have some kind of reaction to it. It has to hit you at some point, particularly when you see the kids. Believe what you want about the parents, but it's hard to see the kids in those kinds of living conditions.
Right. And as a professor of counseling, I know your studies are focused on the people who are on this side of the border. Right. So what is it that those images do to people who are watching or hearing?
Well, what we see is when the combination of the viewing images, seeing these things in media, as well as the experiences with racism and discrimination, it tends to erode that person's sense of self, their defenses, so to speak, their self identities, how they view themselves in a larger kind of context. It all kinds of chips away at them, eventually leading to some form of self-hatred.
And how do you know this? What are you seeing?
Well, I engaged in a research study nationally with about 350 undergraduate Latino students. They participated, took a series of survey instruments, and what we found was a direct connection between experiences of discrimination and the internalization of racism.
So, but that was only in Latino students, and how do you know, is this happening in Anglo students or African American students? Well,
the bulk of the research up to this point has been in African American students or communities of African descent. There's also some Afro-Caribbean research as well. I'm, to my knowledge, one of the only researchers that are actually looking at internalized racism in the Latino community.
So explain again what that means when you say internalized racism.
It's the acceptance of dominant discourse. It's the acceptance of stereotypes. It's the acceptance of beliefs that paint one's ethnic community poorly. So in the case of Latinos, for example, it's the belief that white folks are genetically superior to Latino folks, both in terms of mental capacity, intelligence, but also character. So the folks in this survey would answer that Latinos are more prone to be addicted to drugs, are more likely to be criminals. A script that sounds shockingly familiar to our current presidents.
So I guess what you're saying is that this didn't just start with these images from the caravan.
No, this is a long-standing script. Many of the biases we see around, particularly Mexican and Mexican-American communities, we can draw all the way back to the Mexican-American War. However, the ramp up it comes from the 2016 election and the way our current president has portrayed communities of Mexican and Mexican-American descent as rapists, as drug dealers, as criminals, as murderers.
So do you see that there's a way to combat that? I mean, how do you, I mean, we don't always believe what we see or hear.
Right, but if you see it often enough, if you are told often enough, eventually you will accept it as fact. So what we have to do is we have to start engaging in an honest conversation across difference. We have a problem with race in this country, and until we actively address that issue and speak across difference, we're going to continue to have some of these divides.
Actively address that. How do you do that?
It starts with honest conversations. When difference occurs, trying to understand why. Honestly trying to understand the experiences of others. And it's not something that can be solved in a 15-minute conversation. It's something that takes commitment. It takes sitting down with folks, sometimes multiple times, for extended periods of time to engage in that conversation. With the undergraduates I work with, it's about inviting that conversation about discrimination. How does it impact you? What kind of effect has it had on your experience?
Do you find that it matters if they're first generation American or fifth generation? Does it make a difference?
It does. It does in terms of how they see themselves ethnically. What the research consistently shows is usually by the third generation U.S. born, the values are much more in line with dominant U.S. American values. They're more like white Americans than they are like Latino Americans. So they're much less likely to see themselves in that frame to begin with. So it's usually that first and second generation that struggle with this the most. After those generations, the disconnect also then leads to the internalization of that bias. They're more likely to passively accept it and to not even notice it's there in the first place.
Wow. Does it matter, based on your research, if it's images or words that people are seeing or hearing?
The interpersonal has the biggest impact. So literally experiencing discrimination, whether that be in how you're treated at a store or in somebody's words, those have the strongest effects on Latinos.
Very interesting. Well, thank you so much for bringing your studies forward and starting the conversation, certainly in the classroom and hopefully in Colorado and across the U.S. as well.
Well, thank you very much for having me.
My pleasure. Dr. Hipólito Delgado. Appreciate it. Thank you. And we'll be right back.